So we're going to do some TraxNews stories that our members contributed. You could be a member, you could contribute to news. Starting number one, Randy, Dublin, Dallas. The FBI secretly using a $2 billion travel company as a global surveillance tool. Do you guys know anything about this out there?
Yep.
What do you know?
Well, generally speaking, I know that part of the CIA and part of the FBI in the modern era of surveillance has to do with using private international corporations and putting people who are sort of double workers. They would work in the corporation, but they would have a double identity of being either CIA or FBI agents, and it makes sense because they'd be able to go all over the world and be in different countries and do.
Well, that's the point of being in the CIA.
Yeah.
They got to hold shit down. They got to do this. So thank you. If you got a story and you know what's going on, put it up so we can make moves. Okay. Turkey cuts water supply to northeast Syria during the global pandemic. I mean, I guess they're at war. And look at all these now. I complain about traffic here in New York, and I don't get enough vacation time that I could give to myself, and I have to do this. Is what the fuck people are doing over there. Jugs trying to get some water. Just water is what they're asking for. That's terrifying, and this is of course from FISA. FISA made this story. She's got her eye on all of the Middle East where people's lives are being destroyed. FISA is there to save the day, so to speak, or she's voicing it out. Again, if you know something that's going on, please join. But access to water is seen internationally as a basic human right, and by definition, these actions by Turkey violate such international human rights laws. Ruthless things. I feel sorry for these people. There's nothing else I could say. Of course, this is terrible. A displaced Syrian boy from Ras, someplace, a border town controlled by Turkey and its Syrian proxies, filled jerry cans with water. God bless these people. I hope something positive happens to them. What's next on the deal? Oh, more FISA. The UAE's peace deal with Israel is set to normalize international human rights violations in Palestine. So she puts peace deals in quotation because the United Arab Emirates kind of struck a little peace deal chord with Israel, saying, you know what, Israel, you have a right to exist. But, Israel, human rights violator. Who's not a human rights violator? Come on now. Boris, what are your thoughts? You violate human rights on a frequent basis.
Well, whatchamacallit. So, FISA's article, basically there's a movement in the world. Everybody who really supports Palestinians supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, basically, which uses economic power and political power in order to try to force Israel to stop building settlements in the West Bank and to actually move forward for a deal for the Palestinians to have their own state. And that movement is being delegitimized partly by this deal, because this deal is strictly economic in nature and somewhat political in nature. They also talk about how there was a military deal that was going on alongside this that might have
Iran,
helped it out.
Iran's probably playing a role because Israel and United Arab Emirates might have some sort of alliance that can, counterbalance Iranian influence. And they're saying, you know what, Israel is better than Iran 10,000 times, even though they take the land and the Muslim and the this and the that and the human rights and all this. It's clear that I don't really know the details of their human rights violations. I'm sure that they're there. I'm sure it's a real fucked up situation. But let's see what Pfizer writes here. Since the creation of Israel in 1948, establishing diplomatic ties with Arab countries has always been a strategic dream for Israel, which, I guess it's definitely they wanted that acknowledgement, they wanted that placement there, and it took them. It's almost 100 years. 20 years from now would be, 28 years from now would be 100 years for them to be able to say, hey, we're here. We are a Jewish state. Unfortunately, has engaged in Arab-Israeli wars and is isolated from Muslim countries in the Middle East with peaceful relations with Egypt and Jordan, but never engaged in trade. Now history is made as the oil-rich United Arab Emirates is in the peace deal. They're doing a mazal, Everything is going to be fantastico. Of course, there's people upset about all this. They're like, oh, you're dealing with the Israeli, that's the enemy. Baba John, why are you screwing us? They're not happy about it. You know what I'm saying? But, Jenny, who are you for? Israel or Palestine or who?
Well, it's a very complicated situation,
That's the right answer.
but you know, there's been, I would say Palestine, because they're kind of like the underdogs. I feel like, you know, violating the human rights has been a really big deal about them, for them.
So you're on Team FISA.
Yep, Team FISA.
What about you, Max?
Man, I don't like to speak too much on things I know absolutely nothing about, but I know there's some issues going on between Palestine and Israel, and it seems to have been that way my whole life. I hope they get it figured out in a way that's mutually beneficial
I hope so
for both
too.
sides. So.
This is what the FISA's trying to get at right
Yeah.
here. Israel and what do you call it? Their best buds, while they're getting bombed in Gaza. You know what I'm saying? As a side note, the biggest human rights violator is FISA. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So basically, listen. You can voice your opinion. Obviously, FISA feels like it's Israel's got their thumb on the people and they're fucking them over. I hear that very, very often. But on the other hand, of course, there's always something on the other hand. Let's have Boris have the final word, and don't forget to submit your story. If you have an opinion, you have a story, something going on in the world that we should know about, and you're letting us down by not letting us know what the fuck it is, and participating and let CNN run the whole shit, it's your problem. What the final word right here?
I mean, basically, one of FISA's main points is like, especially that's evident in that picture. Like, don't you think it's ironic and just hypocritical that the United Arab Emirates and Israel made a peace deal, while at the same time, for the past months and years, Israel has been bombing Gaza and cutting off supplies and cutting off the trade, the roads that enter into Gaza. So it's like a whole chunk of Palestinians are literally suffering while Israel and United Arab Emirates are making this awesome peace deal.
Well, listen, I mean, they're making a peace deal. Someone's got to make a peace deal. But the reason why Israel is doing what they're doing is because they take a hard line when they're firing rockets or they're doing some shit. They're firing up and they're destroying them, beating the shit out of them. And of course, innocent people die and this dies and that dies. But Israel is trying to hold down their territory. I don't really know what the fuck they're doing, but to me it seems like all these human rights violations are not because they hate the people in the Gaza Strip, it's because they displaced them to some degree. Both of them are angry at each other, and Israel's beating them down and telling them, you're not going to get what you want out of this situation. Not the right thing to do. They definitely got the raw deal, these people here. They definitely got the raw deal, and the pressure that they're under is enormous. And Israel's not going to let up that pressure. They're not going to let up that pressure because they feel like they got a chip on their shoulder, and they were fucked with at some point of time. And they were, their pizzeria was bombed, and you're going to fucking, or whatever it was, all these back and forth violent things. So they're going to say, you're going to do this? If you tit for tat, if you're going to try to fire some rockets over here or dig some tunnels, we're going to bomb the shit out of you. Not good, not good. They're fighting over a scrap of fucking dirt. It's terrible. What's the next story? Well, nothing important. We'll talk about that in the next episode.